Hello learners, welcome to this session of teleconference, and here we'll be discussing a course Information Processing and Retrieval MLII 102. We'll be discussing it as a series, as a number of consecutive sessions, and this is the first session. This is part 1 of Information Processing and Retrieval, and we hope to cover all the units one after the other in different sessions. I'll start with discussing the overall structure of this course, and then we'll come down to units one after the other. This course has its own importance because when we talk of information which is too much around us today, the one very important thing is how to retrieve this information. The name of this course varies a little across different universities, so maybe besides our learners, if we have learners from other universities also, in some of the universities this course is named as Information Retrieval. We have named it as Information Processing and Retrieval, and we cover all aspects including processing and retrieval when we discuss this course. Now, the going little bit into the past, because you would have done your bachelor's degree already, you would have already studied information organization in your theory as well as practice courses. And there in your bachelor's degree, what you had discussed was mainly document classification. You had also studied theory of classification or theory of knowledge organization, as we call it by different names in different curricula. We are doing a continuation. The particular course is a continuation of those courses wherein you have studied, while you studied theory of classification, you studied dynamic theory of classification, you also studied in document processing and organization the different schemes of classification. You also were introduced little bit to documentation and also indexing and abstracting. Here we take you further into the theory of knowledge organization, where this particular course talks about how information is processed, stored, organized, retrieved. Now, this particular course, as I said, is divided into 5 blocks, and these 5 blocks are here on your screen. The first block is organization of information. I'll tell you about the details of this. Bibliographic description is the second block. Content development block 3, information storage and retrieval systems is block 4, and block 5 is information retrieval. This is very systematically organized, the course, because we start with information organization, wherein we discussed intellectual organization of information. I'll talk about this intellectual organization of information when I talk of course 1. And in this block, basically block 1, it is intellectual organization of information, that is unit 1. Then we'll discuss about indexing languages in 2 different units. We have to divide this into 2 units because this is little voluminous, and thematically we have divided this into 2. The first unit talks about thesauri and also talks about subject heading lists, whereas the unit 3, on which is part 2 of indexing languages, talks about classification schemes. You might be wondering that you have already studied classification schemes in the bachelor's degree. Why we repeat it here? We talk a little bit at advanced level. We'll talk of these units, and then you will come to know how it is at a little higher level. Then the next unit is indexing systems and techniques, wherein we introduce to you the pre-coordinate, post-coordinate indexing and the techniques that are used in these different systems. Then the final unit in block 1 is evaluation of indexing systems, which is very important because of the various factors, that is the effectiveness, efficiency, the resources that are going into developing a information system. You all would know that historically we have the Cranfield experiments, and we'll talk about all these, the different experiments that were conducted to evaluate the indexing systems. Now let us move on to block 2, and block 2 is bibliographic description, which you have also been introduced at the bachelor's degree, but here with a continuation we move on to a higher level. We start with the principles and evolution of bibliographic description, a little bit of historical account, and then the next unit is rules for bibliographic description, where we have discussed the cataloging codes, and then the standards, wherein we talk of the different standards, that is the MARC, Unimark and others. And then finally in this block the last unit is on metadata, where we have talked of MARC 21, the 856 field, because we are in the domain of digitized information, electronic resources. There are issues of compatibility. All these have been discussed in this unit. Now coming to block 3, that is content development. Going thematically and very systematically, we talk about how contents are developed, because we are talking of electronic and digital information. So the first unit talks about the norms and guidelines of content development, where we have given different standards that exist, and this is quite comprehensive as far as norms and guidelines are concerned. We'll talk about them in detail. Then introduction to HTML and XML. We are revising this course, and while revising we'll update this content development, and then web-based content development and multilingual content development, Unicode and other things have been discussed here in block 3. Block 4 is on information storage and retrieval systems, because till now we have talked about tools, we have talked about how we have evolved, we have talked about rules and standards, and we have also talked about the intellectual organization of information. Now we have a discussion on information storage and retrieval systems. What is an information storage retrieval system? What are its components? And what are the principles that are involved here? Then we have a discussion on compatibility of information storage retrieval systems, which is very important. And the latest that we have in information storage retrieval systems is intelligent information storage retrieval systems. That is how we conclude block 4. And finally, the last block is the most important as far as times are concerned. We start with information retrieval processes and techniques, because searching is very important, and here we talk about how the different processes and techniques are discussed. Then information retrieval models and their application, the vector space model and all other models have been discussed here. And finally, search strategies, processes and techniques. So this is how the whole course goes on. So I think by having a view of the overall structure of this particular course, you would have seen that if you successfully study this particular course, you will be able to design an information storage retrieval system, you will be able to handle an information storage retrieval system, and also you will be able to pursue research in information processing and organization. Now let us go to block 1, where we will talk about the unit 1. The very important thing when you talk of block 1, unit 1 is intellectual organization of information. It is a little abstract topic in nature. Therefore, we'll talk about it a little bit in detail, and also from the exam point of view also it is generally asked, and otherwise also this forms the basis of this course. Therefore, we should really know what is this intellectual organization of information and why we study this as part of this particular course. So we would start with how information grows. What is this process? And as we all know that it is the human thought that forms the basis of this. So what is this process of human thought where ideas generate? What are the stages of generation of these ideas? And it is the generation, then these ideas are conveyed to others, disseminated, communicated, and those who receive it, they try to assimilate it, and they try to interact with of this assimilation from the external sources to what they have already within them. That is how knowledge is created, and this data, information, knowledge, and finally whenever it is required in real life situations, we apply this knowledge as per the demand of the time, requirement of the time. That is how we say a person is wise, that is wisdom. So this is how information moves from data to knowledge to wisdom. This is the process we should be very clear about. Graphically, I have shown it here on your screen that what are the stages of this changes of information to data to wisdom, and what are the processes that go on in converting this. You would see that it is observation that is most important, that help us to create ideas and data, and we may be using our 5 senses and also the extra senses in the form of equipment, apparatus. We may be using any to generate this data using our external world. We may be observing, we may be in the laboratory also. So wherever we are, this is how data is generated. Now this data is organized, logically organized as far as the relationship among the different pieces of data is concerned, and we generate information and we follow systematic principles to generate this information. Now this information is organized into small themes. We call them as subjects. These are compact departmentalization of this information. We try to put them into barriers, or we can also say as a continuum, and these are called subjects, wherein we apply fundamental principles. And we read, we study, we learn, we assimilate, and this is how we create knowledge, because knowledge is innate to one, knowledge is personal to one, and it becomes public knowledge in the form of the products of knowledge, which may be print sources, or maybe electronic sources, or maybe human sources, or maybe institutional sources also. This is how knowledge is generated, and here we perceive, we do modeling, we do processes to create this knowledge. And finally, we apply this knowledge using judgment, using correlation. We also contextualize, and this is how this knowledge is used as wisdom. So this is the continuum that is very important, and all this are intellectual activities. So when we talk of intellectual organization of information, what is that? Basically, when we try to organize information, the most important is it is an intellectual activity. We apply our intellect, though we also resort to mechanical processes therein, but then the main thing that is involved in organizing this information is our intellect. That is why it is different to different people. Though we may be following certain principles or procedures, but then to every person it is different because of the intellect that is involved. So that is what is intellectual organization of information, that it is the intellect that is applied to organize knowledge, because knowledge is not a product, information is not a product, it is something which is how we perceive this knowledge or information. Therefore, intellect is defined as, I read it here on your slide, if you see that it is the faculty of thinking, learning, understanding, assimilating, acquiring, and organizing mental constructs and recording them in a suitable form for communication, because it becomes public knowledge only if you convey to others, and this should also be organized. So that is why we say that intellectual organization of information is very important. Machines exist, they are doing it. Today, in the age of artificial intelligence, we see organization of knowledge is there. AI is doing wonders, but it falters also because intellect is required, and that is why we say intellectual organization of information is very important. And particularly in a course of information processing and retrieval, we should also try to understand that why intellectual organization of information. Now, organization of knowledge is organized, this may be due to creation, maybe self-organization, or maybe bibliographic organization also. Now, when you talk of bibliographic organization, it could be extraction, which could be in the form of indexing or abstracting, or it could be summation. When you do review of literature, you do survey, consolidation of literature, you come across different products, and the process that is done there is summation. We try to correlate the literature, we try to reflect upon what people have said, and we try to provide it in a form of a summary which exists as an independent product. So these are the processes that are intellectual processes that are involved even in bibliographic description. Now, why should intellectual organization of information be done? You all know that if information doesn't make sense to someone, then there is no point doing it. And for that, the basic criteria is the intellectual organization of information. When you say thematically putting the things in order, that the process that goes behind it is intellectual organization of information. That is why we have stressed in this unit intellectual organization of information. And if there is something lacking when you do intellectual organization of information, it affects your communication, it affects recall and precision when you talk of information processing and organization and retrieval. The information that you recall as a result of the query that you put in there is some drawback. You have the intellectual input is not the input the way it should have been. It affects your recall. It may be much more recall, it may be less precision. And what we want to achieve today in the age of information overload and in the age of complex information that is involved these days, it is very important that this intellectual organization is very appropriate into the processes that are involved. Now, IOI applications, intellectual organization of information, where does it find its applications? Right from primary communication. You all know that you may write a piece of literature, you may write one page, you may write a chapter, you may write an article, you may write a book, until and unless you have not organized it. Until and unless you have not organized your thoughts, you have not put them as a continuum, you have not tried to contextualize them, you have not related them, you have not put them in a sequence of things that one who reads it is able to understand it, because then there is no point doing it. Therefore, we say that when you are doing it, that it has to be used in primary communication. So intellectual organization is a very important part of primary communication. Yes. Similarly, when you talk of its use in indexing systems, it finds a use in indexing systems. Whether it is derived indexing or it is assigned indexing, you need intellectual organization of information. You use machines, you use computers, you use technology, but then a person who designs such a systems, his intellectual input is an important part of any indexing or indexing system, whether it is derived indexing or assigned indexing. You all know that it could be keyword indexing, it could be assigned indexing, you may be using certain vocabularies, you may be using certain tools, but then it demands intellectual organization of information, and that is very important in that. Similarly, in case of indexing languages, whether it is thesauri or it is subject indexing lists or it is classification systems, intellectual organization of information is very important. If you just open a list of subject headings, whether it is CS list or Library of Congress list of subject headings, you would find that if you want to really use it, you have to see what is the philosophy, what are the principles. If you do not follow that, you will not be able to index the literature, you will not be able to search the literature, because there is a intellectual aspect, there is a intellectual component that goes into designing that, and that is to be followed while applying that scheme of the subject heading list or thesaurus, or it is a thesaurus facet. Similarly, in case of a classification system also, that is a basic component of any classification system, and we have to follow that and we have to use it. Now coming to user services. Even in user services, intellectual organization of information is very important. Though these days we are talking of disintermediation of information. The user doesn't need help from anyone, but still if you see the e-resources, if you want to use a particular search engine, you would find that if the the component of intellectual organization is missing, it will affect your results. You will see that search engines have their own quality, they have their own the search strategies, they have their own systems which one has to follow, and if one does not follow, the results are affected. And what is the base of all that? That is intellectual organization of information. Similarly, in content analysis, again, until and unless the component of intellect is missing, you will find that it will not be that useful. So please remember, when you talk of intellectual organization, it is based on the logic, it is based on the critical thinking, it is based on the understanding of the concepts. You are able to map the knowledge that you are trying to depict, whether it is in primary communication or it is in secondary information. Intellectual organization is very important. Now, if you talk of information retrieval systems today, because if you see your course material, you will find that much of the course material is basically for manual systems, and you will find that today, in the age today, it is mostly automated systems. So we have to keep ourselves updated. Therefore, what is happening today in the changing environment? How is the environment today that you have to be updated? Because if your course material is more towards manual, you should be interested and also should be very critically seeing how things are changing. You will find that one factor is digital information, the other factor is search engines, the third factor is the natural language processing tools that have come in, the artificial intelligence that is there. Therefore, you have to very clearly analyze that today when you are talking of information processing and retrieval, the sources have changed, the user is different, the demands are different, and the technology is also different. So as students of information processing and retrieval, you should try to analyze the situation. It is the tools and techniques that we talk of for manual information processing and retrieval are still the basis that forms the base of this course. So starting with the manual things, the theory and philosophy beyond, for the manual searching, for the manual processing of information, for the manual organizing of information. Like when we talk of indexing, we talk of pre-coordinate indexing or we talk of post-coordinate indexing. You would have seen that in pre-coordinate indexing, the intellectual organization, the intellectual activity is purely the crux of that. It is manual efforts only when you are talking of pre-coordinate indexing. But the moment you move to post-coordinate indexing, you would see the discussion in your course is moving towards automated. We start with semi-automatic, we move towards automatic, and today we are purely in the age of automated retrieval. And added to that, the applications of artificial intelligence today, in whether it is collecting information or it is organizing information or presenting information or searching for information, in all these aspects you will find that technology is prime important. So you should be well aware of web indexing, you should be well aware of web searching. What are the tools there? What is the technology there? That is how you have to be finishing your course. So starting the course, I would like to recapitulate here that you have to be very first of all clear what are these 5 blocks, how these have been organized differently from each other. The first block talks about building a base for what is information processing and retrieval. What are the different aspects of this course, information processing and retrieval, and therefore you would see that the 5 units in that are basically help you to develop a base for that. And then moving on to the second block, you talk about bibliographic description, which you have already studied. So, but then continuing with that, we talk about the rules, we talk about the formats, we talk about mark, we talk about unimark, we then moving to that, the compatibility of electronic records. Therefore, we have a discussion on field 856, and then we have introduced content development. If we have talked about HTML or XML, no one bars you, or you are not limited to that only. You should see how content is developed today, what are the different languages, tools and techniques that are there. You should be well aware of that. What are the standards? Because today, projecting your institution or yourself, web is an important agency, is an important interface. And not only that, while you develop contents, user interface is also very important. In an information processing and retrieval system, information storage and retrieval system, user interface is an important component, because you may be having a very strong backend, but then the user interface is weak. That will really affect your information storage and retrieval system. Therefore, we have talked about that in block 4, and in block 5 we talk about the different techniques, search strategies, search techniques, and here you will talk about the latest developments in this area. And this is how you should study all the blocks. And you can, while studying that, we have covered unit 1 today. We'll talk about the further units in our further sessions. In case you have any questions or doubts, you are welcome to ask. You can also contact us on our email ID that is already there on the website. Thank you.